They say the mountain used to watch us. Not metaphorically, literally. A face carved by wind and time, perched high above Franconia notch, granite eyes fixed on the valley. Generations grew up believing the rock formation known as the Old Man of the Mountain was a guardian. Something proud, something strong. But what if it wasn't watching over us? What if it was watching for something? The first time anyone gave it a name, it wasn't Old Man. It was just the face. Native Abenaki stories speak of the cliffs that whisper and the wind that knows your name. To them, the mountain wasn't just a place, it was alive, a spirit bound to stone. Hunters were told never to sleep beneath its shadow. If you did, the face would turn ever so slightly and mark you. In 1805, two surveyors, Francis Whitcomb and Luke Brooks, were mapping the area when one of them looked up and froze. "He's looking at us," Luke reportedly said. They scrambled for paper and drew what they saw. 5 jagged granite ledges, stacked perfectly, forming the profile of a man's face. Forehead, nose, lips, chin. From the right angle, it was flawless. News spread. The Old Man of the Mountain became a New England icon. But the Abenaki never looked directly at it. Even decades later, tribal elders avoided photos that captured the formation. Some said the mountain wore more than one face. The one it showed you, and the one it showed when no one else was looking. By the mid-1800s, settlers in Franconia began sharing odd stories. Hikers would lose time near the base of the cliff. Echoes would behave strangely, sometimes not returning at all. One hunter, Abel Rockwell, claimed he shouted into the ravine and heard a voice return, but not his own. "The words came back different," he said. "They said what I said, but slower, like it was listening and thinking." The formation quickly became a symbol of endurance. Its face, unchanging. Its gaze, eternal. But stone is not eternal. And faces, no matter how fixed, can change. By the summer of 1946, the face on the mountain was more than a landmark. It was a point of pride. Tourists came by the hundreds to see it glint in the morning sun, its jagged silhouette sharp against the sky. Local businesses sold postcards and paperweights with its likeness. It was said to never blink, never change, never fail. And yet, something beneath it was shifting. That summer, the U.S. Forest Service assigned a new ranger to Franconia Notch, Thomas Greaves, 38 years old. A quiet man from Vermont. Former trail guide. No wife. No children. He'd served in the war, but rarely spoke of it. To those who worked alongside him, Thomas was calm, careful, and completely rooted in reality. He was also a meticulous note-keeper. In his logbooks, everything was recorded: temperatures, trail conditions, number of hikers, bird sightings. But tucked between the official entries, there were personal ones too. Less frequent, scribbled hastily, almost always written in the late hours of the night. June 12, 1946, woke to the sound of boots on gravel. Thought it was hikers, checked the trailhead. No one signed in. No footprints. Still heard steps after I returned to the cabin. June 20th, 1946, 2 ravens circling near the cliff. Same as yesterday, and day before. Unusual. They don't call, just hover. June 26th, 1946, the face looked different today. Can't explain how. Just older. The ranger's cabin was a simple one-room shelter tucked into the trees about half a mile from Profile Lake. By July, Thomas began sleeping less. He mentioned it to a friend in a nearby town. Said the woods felt off, like they were holding their breath. He wasn't scared, the friend later said, just unsettled, like a man waiting for something he couldn't name. On July 9th, Thomas made one final log entry. "I heard the mountain breathe, and I swear I saw his eyes shift to watch me. They've always looked out. Today they looked down." That entry was time-stamped 4:32 a.m. It was the last thing Thomas ever wrote. That morning, when he didn't check in via radio, a patrol was sent out. They found his cabin locked from the inside. The bed was neatly made. His ranger coat hung on the wall. His hat rested on the table, brim down. The journal lay open beside a cold cup of coffee. There was no sign of struggle. No blood. No tracks. Except for his boots. Gone. They were missing from the small mat by the door. His other shoes were untouched. And no one ever found them. A quiet search was conducted. Weeks passed. The Forest Service issued no public statement beyond a missing persons notice. But according to internal documents, some of which were quietly declassified decades later. His disappearance raised internal concerns. One memo reads, "This is the third unexplained absence in the Franconia region in 5 years. No pattern in behavior, but similar locations. Recommend limited access to summit during off-peak months." The story faded, like many others do in small towns with long winters. Locals whispered that Thomas had walked into the mountain, that the face on the cliff had grown tired of being looked at and wanted to see for itself. In later interviews, a maintenance worker for the park recalled something strange. On a hike weeks after the search ended, he noticed a shallow crack running from the corner of the old man's eye, something that hadn't been there before. "It looked like a tear," he said, "like the stone was weeping." In the decades that followed, people would sometimes mention Ranger Greaves in passing, just a name, a mystery, a footnote in a folder. But something about his last entry lingered. Not just what he saw, but how he felt it. The mountain had turned to look at him, and maybe it didn't like what it saw. On a cloudless afternoon in October 1971, a 22-year-old hiker named Clara Myers signed the trail register at the Lafayette Campground trailhead. She wore sturdy boots, a bright blue windbreaker, and carried a small canvas rucksack with her lunch, a camera, and a weather-beaten paperback. She told the ranger she was headed for a short hike along Echo Trail, planning to loop around the south end of Profile Lake before returning by sunset. She never came back. The first signs of concern came late that evening. Her dorm roommate in Hanover hadn't heard from her. By noon the next day, her father had driven up from Massachusetts. He insisted she was responsible, never the type to wander. A search team was formed by that evening. They found her pack first. It was neatly set down beside the lake's shoreline, as if placed with intention. Nothing missing. No damage. Her book was closed and dry. A bag of trail mix rested beside it, untouched. Her analog wristwatch, wedged into a loop on the strap, had stopped ticking. 4:17 p.m. The official search lasted 3 days. Volunteers swept the lake's perimeter. Divers checked beneath the water, though the lake wasn't deep. The forest echoed with the calls of her name, but the sound felt swallowed, thickened by something in the air. One searcher remarked, "It was like yelling into cotton." The forest didn't echo the way it should. On the second day, 3 hikers came forward, unsure whether their account was relevant. They had seen a woman in a blue windbreaker standing beneath the cliff edge, just below the old man's chin. She wasn't moving. One of the men thought she was speaking to someone above her. They couldn't hear what she was saying. She was looking up, one of them said, like she was waiting for it to answer. When they rounded the bend in the trail again, she was gone. The problem was, there was no trail below the cliff's chin, just sheer vertical rock. And Clara Myers had no climbing gear. The story, like Thomas Greaves before it, never made national news. A quiet loss, a closed file. But what made it linger was what came after. Over the next 6 months, rangers and hikers began reporting something strange, sound behaving badly. Echo Trail, known for its natural reverberation, began to misfire. People would clap or shout or sing, and the sound wouldn't bounce back. Sometimes it vanished entirely. Other times, it came back delayed, distorted, warped like a voice in a tunnel. One ranger, anonymous in reports, recorded an echo session with a field mic. On playback, there were no sounds for the first 10 minutes. Then, faintly, something different, a single whisper, "Don't look down." The ranger swore he hadn't said it. No one else was near. He quit a few weeks later. Years passed. The trail remained open. Tourists continued to visit the old man, oblivious to the names buried in dusty ledgers. But hikers began to mention something in passing. Never dramatic, never fearful. Just strange. A woman glimpsed in a blue jacket, far down the slope, then gone when they turned back. An uneasy feeling while standing near Profile Lake shore, like being watched from above. A sensation that the face in the cliff had shifted, only slightly, in angle or gaze. One child asked their mother why the statue man was smiling. But that day, the light was flat. The face looked as it always had, solemn, weathered, unsmiling. There was one final entry in Clara Myers' case file. A handwritten note by a ranger supervisor, dated February 1972, after the investigation officially ended. Whatever happened to her, it didn't feel like accident. It felt like something asked for her. And she answered, Today, a small plaque rests by the lake, commemorating the lives of hikers lost in the Franconia region. Clara's name is not on it. Too many years. Too little evidence. But her story is still told, quietly. Usually at the edge of campfires, when the wind picks up and someone mentions the way the lake never seems to echo quite right anymore. Some hikers swear they've seen footprints that start at the tree line and lead out onto the water's edge. Always boot prints. Always alone. And sometimes, in the spring thaw, a flash of bright blue appears through the snow melt, then disappears by morning. By the late 1970s, the stories surrounding the old man of the mountain had begun to quietly thread together, like veins in stone, delicate and unspoken, but undeniable. Most didn't talk about them openly. Locals, especially, seemed to know when not to. But if you asked the right people, in the right bars, on the right nights, you might hear mention of a strange superstition, a pattern, a kind of unspoken law among those who knew the cliff not as a monument, but as something older. They called it the Rule of Three. The rule was simple, in theory. The mountain warns you 3 times. Ignore all 3, and you don't come back the same. Or at all. The first warning comes in sound. Or rather, the absence of it. You'll be walking along the Echo Trail or the rim above Profile Lake, and suddenly, without wind, without cause, the world goes mute. No birds. No branches creaking. Your own footsteps become muffled, as though the dirt has softened beneath you. Some describe it as being underwater. Others say it feels like standing in the middle of an abandoned church, hollow, reverent, watched. It usually passes within a minute. But when the silence lifts, the air feels thinner. You find yourself checking behind you more than once. That's your first warning. The face is aware of you now. The second warning is directional. You'll hear someone call your name. Clearly, with the right rhythm, the right tone. Sometimes it's a loved one. Sometimes your own voice. Always from behind, just off the trail. When you turn to look, there's no one there. And there's never an echo. Not this time. Some people try to rationalize it. Sound bouncing strangely, tricks of wind, a prank. But others have followed it, left the trail, chased the voice into the trees. They don't go far, because at some point, the voice stops and the silence returns. And then they hear breathing, not their own. It's a moment meant to be survived, not solved. The third warning is the most subtle and the most personal. You'll glance up at the cliff, maybe from the lake's edge or the summit ridge. You've seen the old man a dozen times before, maybe hundreds, but something will be wrong. The angle of the nose, the brow, the shadow beneath the chin. It's all slightly off, like the face has rotated just a few degrees. You'll tell yourself it's the lighting, or the season, or the fatigue in your eyes. But in your gut, you'll feel it. He's not looking out anymore. He's looking at you. Rangers used to call it face drift, a term passed around in half-jokes. You see face drift? They'd ask with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. No one ever documented it officially. But the warnings passed through generations of trail workers, EMTs, and longtime hikers, spoken in low tones, usually with a gesture. 3 fingers pressed to the chest, then tapped once against the forehead. Some think it's superstition. Others call it a kindness. A way the mountain gives you one last chance to walk away. Those who ignored all 3 warnings were said to change. Not always in a way you could see. Some came back from their hikes, quieter. They'd forget basic things. Where they'd parked, which trail they took, what day it was. One man came home and refused to speak for a week. When he finally did, all he said was, the echo kept going. It didn't come back. It just kept going. Another woman, an artist, burned all her sketchbooks. Every last one. Her husband asked why. She told him the face in her drawings wouldn't stay still. It shifted when she wasn't looking. There was even a case in 1985, whispered among older rangers, of a family that hiked up to see the old man at dawn. A mother, father, and their 10-year-old son. They signed in at the trailhead, reached the summit at 6:30 a.m., and were seen by at least 4 other hikers on the way back down. But when they reached their car, the boy wasn't with them. The parents were calm. Too calm. They didn't raise the alarm. When questioned later, the mother kept repeating, he stayed. He wanted to stay. No search party was ever initiated. There was no official record of the boy's name. And the trail register from that day? The ink bled right through his line. Even today, hikers say the rule still holds. Quiet stories. Half-finished conversations. A college group in 2009 had a student fall behind. He later told friends he stopped walking because he suddenly felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. Like the trees all went quiet, just to hear me breathe. Another man, a photographer, swore he saw the old man's profile blink. He hasn't hiked since. So if you ever find yourself in Franconia Notch, remember, if the world goes quiet, listen carefully. If your name is called, don't answer. And if the face turns toward you, don't meet its gaze. Because the mountain doesn't call to everyone. Only the ones who linger. Only the ones who feel seen. In the autumn of 1992, a man named Harold Murnane returned to Franconia Notch after nearly 40 years away. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, bent slightly from time and weather, with the look of someone who had lived most of his life underground. That was true in more ways than one. Harold was a geologist by trade, once contracted by the state to assess the granite stability of Cannon Cliff in the early 1950s. Back then, he had written a dry but thorough report. The Old Man Formation contains visible stress fissures. Stable for now, but time, frost, and water will bring eventual collapse. He was right, but it wasn't the fissures that brought him back. It was what he heard in them. Harold never married. No kids. Retired early after suffering a mild stroke. In his later years, he grew reclusive, spending long weeks alone in his home near Keene. But starting in 1991, he began journaling again. Not about soil or stone, but about dreams. The cliff is humming. The crack beneath the chin opened a little wider today, in my sleep. It's not erosion. It's a mouth, and it's starting to speak. His daughter, Emily, initially dismissed these entries as the fog of aging. But when he started visiting Franconia every week, sometimes staying overnight in his car, sometimes hiking out alone before dawn, she grew concerned. He told her the mountain was communicating, not in words, not in symbols, in pressure, in shifts, in tone. By November of 1992, Harold stopped answering calls altogether. Emily drove up to find his house locked, but not abandoned. The lights were on. The heat was running. A pot of water had boiled dry on the stove. His boots were missing. His winter coat, too. He had left his notes scattered across the dining table. Dozens of hand-drawn diagrams of the old man's fissures, mapped like constellations, connected by jagged black lines. Several pages were filled edge to edge with a single phrase, repeated over and over in ink. It's listening. A week later, park rangers found Harold's car parked near Echo Trail. Inside was a thermos, unopened, a sandwich, uneaten. His spare tape recorder sat in the passenger seat. The tape inside had run out. They began a soft search of the area. This wasn't the first time an elderly visitor had wandered off. But 2 days into the effort, something arrived by mail at Emily's house. No return address, just a weather-stained envelope, postmarked from Lincoln, New Hampshire. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled, "For her, before I go." The recording is 17 minutes long. Most of it is unintelligible. It begins with static, then the sound of wind. Hollow, rhythmic, moving across stone. Harold speaks only once, around the 11-minute mark. His voice is low, barely audible. It was never looking out. It was holding something in. Then more wind. Then a clicking sound, like boots on gravel. Then nothing. But just before the tape ends, in the final 8 seconds, a second voice is heard. Not Harold's. Not human. It speaks in English. Slowly, deeply, like a throat made of rock. Closer. Emily turned the tape over to a university audio lab. They found no sign of manipulation. The frequency signature of the final voice didn't match Harold's or any other known speaker. The case was closed. No body was ever found. His boots were never located. But the staff at the Notch began reporting something new. When they played the tape, on speakers or in headphones, animals went still. Birds stopped mid-chirp. Dogs backed away. One ranger claimed a fox froze in place until the tape stopped. The team eventually destroyed the cassette, but the memory of what it carried still lingers. Locals started saying the mountain hadn't just watched Harold. It had invited him, not out of malice, not even hunger, but loneliness. Stone is slow. It doesn't get many visitors who listen the way Harold did, who heard the shift in silence, who mapped its cracking skin like a message. One hiker who claimed to know Harold said this: "He didn't vanish. He went in." Since then, a few hikers, usually older, usually alone, have stopped at the old viewing platform and stood in silence for long stretches. Some hum under their breath. Others place their palms flat against the railing and close their eyes. A few walk back to their cars afterward and say nothing, but they never return. One woman left a note in the trail register before vanishing into the trees. It read, "If you press your ear to the cliff, you can hear it thinking. But if you wait too long, you start to think like it, too." On the morning of May 3rd, 2003, the sky over Franconia Notch was low and heavy, blanketed by clouds that seemed to press into the granite like wet hands. Rain had come and gone overnight, soft but persistent, and by first light, the roads were slick with runoff. A maintenance worker named Jim Northridge was the first to notice. He'd driven past Profile Lake at 6:17 a.m. on his way to inspect trail washouts. He looked up, out of habit, to greet the face he'd seen since childhood. But it wasn't there. The old man of the mountain was gone. The collapse was quiet. No thunder. No landslide. Just absence. Sometime between midnight and dawn, centuries of frost heave, wind erosion, and the patient work of water had done what time always promised it would. The ledges that had formed the brow, nose, and chin finally gave way. Granite slipped from its perch and tumbled silently down the cliffside, coming to rest in a jumbled grave of stone and lichen. All that remained above was bare rock and a memory. The news spread fast. National headlines. Editorials. Mourning. It was as if New Hampshire had lost its own grandfather. Flags were lowered. A makeshift memorial bloomed with flowers, handwritten notes, and plastic figurines shaped like tiny mountain men. Children cried. Old-timers shook their heads and said things like, "I never thought it'd go in my lifetime." But beneath the grief was something else. A quiet unease. Because the cliff hadn't just collapsed, it had let go of something. And some people noticed. 2 hikers camping at Lonesome Lake Hut reported waking up around 3 a.m., the same window believed to mark the collapse. Both claimed to have heard what they described as a long, slow groan, like wind moving through the throat of a cave. Not the kind of sound stone should make, one of them said. It wasn't falling. It was exhaling. A resident in Lincoln, 5 miles south, reported a vivid dream that night. A man made of rock, standing waist-deep in the lake, turning his head at last, face blank, eyes open. She'd never hiked the trail. Didn't even know the formation had collapsed until 2 days later. Since then, people have started seeing things that shouldn't be there. Not often, but often enough. Hikers standing on the memorial viewing platform, a series of steel profilers arranged to recreate the old man's silhouette, have reported a strange feeling of misalignment. They line up the profile correctly. They look through the guides, but the cliff seems off. Too low, too close. One tourist, a photographer, took a dozen shots of the empty cliff face in perfect afternoon light. When she reviewed them that evening, one image, just one, showed something faint where the face used to be, a reflection. But of a face looking down, not out. She deleted the photo, said it made her chest feel heavy, like pressure before a storm. Then there are the hikers who swear they've heard voices on the trail, not in the forest, but from above. Soft, toneless. Always speaking words they almost understand. A man in his 50s said he heard someone reciting names. His own name was the last one. Others report a growing sense of disorientation near the collapse site. A heaviness. The wind seems to shift directions more than it should. Sound scatters strangely. One ranger claimed he heard footsteps beside him, perfectly in sync, for 5 minutes, despite walking the trail completely alone. He turned back early that day. There's also the matter of the viewing stones. Placed at the Memorial Plaza, these granite slabs allow visitors to align the steel rods with the cliff to visualize the lost face. Families pose for photos. Children squint and say they can see it again. But every few months, a new report emerges, usually from a child, of a second face. Not the profile, a full face, peering straight out from the rock. One little boy pointed to it and said, "That man has cracks in his mouth." His mother laughed. The ranger who overheard did not. Emily Murnane, the daughter of Harold Murnane, the geologist who vanished in 1992, visited the site in 2005. She hadn't returned to the notch in over a decade. She stood in silence for a long time, holding a small rock from her father's collection. She left it on the edge of the platform. Later, she told a local paper, I don't think the face fell. I think it changed. Perhaps the worst kind of haunting is the one that no longer has a form. Something you can't point to anymore. Can't blame. Can't memorialize. The face was never just stone. It was a lock. A seal. A thing designed to look out, so that what waited inside didn't look back. Now it's broken. And the mountain is listening again. The fog in Franconia Notch has always behaved strangely. It doesn't drift. It arrives. Fast. Deliberate. Often without warning. Locals say it rolls in like it knows where it's going. Sometimes it clings to the water. Sometimes it climbs the mountain. Sometimes it just waits. Since the collapse of the old man, that waiting has become more noticeable, and it's no longer just the mountain that people look at. Now they watch the fog, because sometimes, just for a moment, something watches back. Between 2004 and 2021, 19 separate hikers, campers, and park employees reported seeing the same figure. Always at dawn or dusk. Always just as the fog thickens or lifts. Always in the same place, near the base of the cliff, or along the path that skirts Profile Lake's north edge. Descriptions vary slightly, but the core details are nearly identical. A tall figure, average build dressed in an old-style ranger uniform, green jacket, round-brimmed hat, or, in some versions, a blue windbreaker standing still. Hands at sides, head slightly tilted up, toward the ledge where the face once was, never speaking, never moving. One woman, hiking alone in 2006, saw the figure standing by the water. She thought it was a real ranger at first, maybe part of the trail staff. She waved. The figure didn't respond. She walked closer, about 40 feet, before a sharp breeze swept through, and the fog thickened again. The figure vanished. There was no splash, no retreating steps, only the smell of wet granite, and something faintly burnt. A man named David Keller, an amateur photographer from Rhode Island, captured what would become the most circulated image of the phenomenon. Taken in October 2015, the photo was supposed to be a simple fog shot of Profile Lake. But in the frame, on the far left, a silhouette stands at the cliff's base. No detail, no face, just an outline, perfectly still, where no trail exists and no man should be. Skeptics call it pareidolia. A shadow, a tree, a trick of light. But David insists. I took 3 pictures in a row. It's only in the middle one. I don't know what that means, but I don't like it. Park staff began hearing whispers, mostly from hikers, never from locals. Some say the phantom is watching the cliff, mourning its loss. Others say it's searching for something. One ranger, who requested anonymity, had an encounter near the old ranger cabin once used by Thomas Greaves, the man who vanished in 1946. It was foggy, not dense, but thick enough that sound didn't carry right. I was walking back to the trailhead when I saw someone on the ridge ahead. Green jacket. Still, watching the rocks. I called out. Thought maybe it was a hiker off trail. No answer. When I got to where he was standing, nothing. But the pine needles were flattened, like someone had stood there for a long, long time. He paused before finishing. It wasn't that he disappeared. It's that he was never there, and I was still afraid. One theory, quietly discussed among longtime hikers, is that the phantom isn't one person. Sometimes it looks like Thomas Greaves. Sometimes like Clara Myers, in her blue jacket. Sometimes like Harold Murnane, with his silver hair and field notebook. Other times, it's no one familiar at all. Just a presence, shaped like a person, wearing faces like masks. Watching, listening, waiting. A woman named Sandra Liu, hiking alone in 2019, left this note in the Summit Trail Register. Fog came in fast. I stopped by the rail to wait it out. Thought I saw someone up on the cliff edge, standing where the brow used to be. Not a ranger, not a hiker, just standing there. It wasn't a threat, just a question, like it was trying to remember me. Park security once received a 911 call from a hiker on the Liberty Spring Trail. The man was panicked, whispering, saying he was being followed. Not chased, not stalked, just followed. He's behind me, the man kept saying. He's not walking, he's just there. Every time I turn around, he's farther away. But he's facing me. There's no footsteps. He's not even real. But I think if I stop, he'll get closer. He's waiting for me to notice. Dispatch lost contact shortly after. The man was found safe the next morning, drenched, disoriented. He didn't speak for a day. When he finally did, all he said was, "The mountain doesn't want to be forgotten." No physical evidence of the phantom exists, no footprints, no clothing, no recordings. And yet the stories grow, because each year, the fog still comes. And each year, someone sees a figure that wasn't there a moment ago, and when they blink, it's gone again. Maybe it's not haunting us at all. Maybe it's looking for the face that once was. Or maybe, just maybe, it's looking for the people who ignored the warnings, who felt the mountain shift beneath them, and stayed too long. Because even though the face is gone, something still remembers where it used to be. It's easy to believe, now, that the old man of the mountain was just a trick of perspective, an accident of geology. Just ledges and shadows. Just weathered stone on a cold ridge. Just a coincidence that it looked so much like a face, and that we kept seeing it as something more. But some say we had it backward all along. That it wasn't our eyes assigning meaning to a cliff. It was his, and he was looking back. Since the collapse, a quiet belief has taken root. More folk than science, more intuition than fact. It doesn't appear in brochures or plaques. You won't find it on hiking forums or geology papers. But if you ask the rangers who've worked the notch for decades, if you speak to the families who've lived in the shadows of Cannon Cliff, if you talk to those who've seen the phantom in the fog, you'll start to hear the same idea. The old man wasn't a monument. He was a seal. The theory goes like this. That face, the great granite profile, wasn't just watching. It was holding something in. An ancient presence, older than tribes, older than mountains, older than weather. Something not malevolent, but patient, curious, bound by shape, trapped by form, contained by the weight of belief. As long as the face looked outward, the thing beneath it stayed still, rested, waited, dreamed. The cliff was a mask, a boundary, a sentinel that stood tall for thousands of years, not to be admired, but to serve a purpose. And then one spring morning it fell. Nothing was unleashed in a storm of fire. No curses, no chaos, just silence, an absence. But sometimes that's worse. Sometimes what frightens us most is what doesn't happen, because it means something is waiting. In the years since the collapse, hikers report a new sensation, one that's harder to describe. Not fear, not danger, not even sorrow, but a kind of recognition. They reach the viewing platform. They look up at the empty cliff, and they feel watched. But not in the way you watch a deer through binoculars or a stranger in a crowded room. This is a focused watching, personal, as if something above is trying to remember your shape, as if it's asking a question you don't understand, but your body does. Some hikers report dreams after visiting the notch. They see the cliff whole again, but wrong, twisting slightly, the mouth smiling just a little too much. Or worse, no face at all, just the hint of one, forming beneath the rock, like a new mask growing from inside out. One woman said her dream ended with her standing at the edge of the cliff, looking down into Profile Lake, and seeing a reflection that wasn't hers. In 2017, a group of geology students installed a ground sensor near the collapse site to measure minor shifts in the ridge. The equipment worked fine for a week, until it began picking up rhythmic pressure pulses just before sunrise. Not seismic, not weather-related, just subtle, slow, like breathing. They removed the sensors. No report was published. A retired ranger named Cal Jacobs, now in his 70s, shared something in an old radio interview. His voice shook, not from fear, but from memory. It's not about ghosts. Not really. It's not about hauntings, either. You ever see something so old it feels like it's older than time? That mountain had a face, sure. But what matters is the intention behind it. Something shaped that cliff. Maybe wind, maybe ice, or maybe something else. Whatever it was, it looked out for a long, long time. And when it stopped, I think it turned around. He paused, then added, "Don't stand too long where the eyes used to be." Sometimes the silence pushes back. Tourists still visit, of course. They take pictures with the viewing profilers. They buy t-shirts and bumper stickers. They point to where the face used to be. But occasionally, someone, usually standing at the edge alone, lowers their camera and just stares into the cliffside. And you can see something change in their posture. They lean forward, slightly, as if listening. As if they hear a sound beneath the wind that no one else does. What do they hear? Some say it's nothing. But a few, just a few, describe it this way: a pressure in the ears. A low hum. Like stone thinking. Like the mountain is rehearsing a name. like something just behind the cliff is waiting for permission to speak again. So maybe the face didn't fall. Maybe it was shed. Like old skin. Like a chrysalis. Like a layer peeled back so something deeper could see. And maybe what remains on the cliff isn't empty space, but a pupil dilating. They built the memorial because they had to. After the collapse, there was grief, real grief. For a face of stone. For a profile that never moved. For something that never truly lived, and yet had shaped memory, pride, and place for generations. They called it a tragedy. But not because a monument had fallen. Because something constant had ended. And when something constant disappears, the silence it leaves behind is not passive. It changes things. The old man of the mountain historic site sits just below where the formation once hung. A carefully designed plaza, with steel profilers arranged along a path. If you stand in just the right spot, the rods align with the cliff and restore the face, at least in silhouette. Children line up to try it. Parents lift toddlers to their shoulders and point. That's where the chin was. That's the brow. That's what your grandfather saw every summer. It's neat. It's clean. It gives people closure. But it's not the same. And everyone knows it. For many visitors, the profilers are enough. But there are those who linger longer. People who stand near the edge after the crowds have left. Who gaze up into the empty cliff face, not trying to recreate the profile, but trying to feel what's missing. Because what's left behind isn't blank. It's open. And in that openness, something waits. A poet once wrote in the guest book, "The face is gone, but the cliff is still shaped like memory. And memory holds its breath." There are stories, never in print, never in the brochures, about strange things happening near the memorial. Minor things, overlooked. A compass needle drifting strangely for a moment, then snapping back. A recording that picks up faint sounds, gravel shifting, a single exhale when no one else is moving. Children pausing mid-sentence, turning slowly to face the cliff, as if spoken to. One woman left her phone recording in her coat pocket as she walked the trail. The footage shows nothing unusual. But when she played it back later, she heard her own footsteps, and something else. A voice, very faint, layered beneath the sound of wind, whispering a single word, "Remember." Locals still hike the ridge. They do it with respect, with silence. There are no more warnings carved in stone. But the rules remain: pass quietly, don't mock the face. Don't linger at the base too long after dark. Don't climb the cliff alone. And if the wind stops, don't look up right away. Wait. Count to 3. Then walk away, slowly. Whatever's watching isn't cruel. But it's curious. And it's patient. The face once gave people a sense of place. Now, it gives them a sense of something else. Something unnamed. Something standing just out of sight. Like a story unfinished, a song caught on the edge of a note. And in that unfinished space, the mountain has found new purpose. Not as a guardian, not as a seal, but as a mirror. It reflects not what we are, but what we might become if we stare too long into the quiet. Because sometimes, all it takes is a crack in stone for something older than language to start listening again. They say that if you visit on a foggy morning, and the clouds hang low across the ledge, and the lake lies still as slate, you might catch it, the barest suggestion of a face. Not the one we remember, but the one that's always been waiting. Just beneath the rock. Just beneath the silence. Just beneath us. If that gave you chills, like the video, share it with someone who sleeps with the lights off, and hit subscribe, or the next photo might have you in it. Tap the bell. The next story drops soon.